Leanna Schooley. I'm Assistant Director at the Center for Texas Studies. We partner with the Fort Worth Public Library to bring these Saturday morning programs to you once a month. It's the first Saturday of every month, if you're not familiar with our pattern. We do them from January through May, and then September through December. And if you're interested in finding out about future programs, you can check our website, which is texasstudies.org. We have them listed there. You can also provide us your email address on the sign-in sheet before you leave, and we will make sure to get you on our email blast so that you'll get a message in your box about those as well. Before I forget, I want to make sure and tell you our next program is on May the 4th, and it's touching a sensitive date about the new JFK tribute here in downtown Fort Worth. Andy Taft, president of Downtown Fort Worth, Inc., will be here to talk about that and share some information about how that project came to be and the process of remembering that date. So be sure and join us for our next program to learn about that. Now today, we are talking about Clark Gardens, which some of you may have heard of before, some of you may not have. It's a wonderful botanical garden. It's a great day trip for folks from Fort Worth. It's about a 45-minute drive or so, really pretty this time of year to head out that direction toward Mineral Wells. And it's a really unique site that went from a private garden for families' enjoyment to a site that is now shared with thousands of members of the public every year as a nonprofit with lots of programs and tours throughout the year. And so without spoiling the story of how the garden came to be, I want to introduce Carol Clark Montgomery, who is the daughter of the founders of the garden, and she will tell us more about the legacy and the landscape at Clark Gardens. Carol?
I'm delighted to be here today, and usually my presentations are I go to a lot of Rotary and Lions Club and Kiwanis, and I say the Pledge of Allegiance at every one of those, and so my talks are usually very informal, and so this one will be today. And you have to have a sense of humor when your boss is 85 years old. And not only is my boss 85 years old, he's my dad. So that requires another sense of humor in that, and he's getting a little deaf. So everything we say today and do, it can leave the room. If I sound disrespectful ever, please forgive me, because it really requires a sense of humor to have the job that I have today. And I enjoy my job, and so it has to have a little bit of a sense of humor about it, but I am excited to share it. So really what Clark Gardens, let me find the thing. I think it's important to start about Clark Gardens. It's that we are a who and not a what. And how did that story get started? You would normally think a botanical park would get started with someone in horticulture, but no, it really was started with a love of gardening. And to this day on staff, we do not have a horticulturist, so we're very much a who. So how did that who get started? Oops, sorry. The equipment here is going to take me a minute to get it going. I'm on the pointer, using the wrong one. There we go. Sorry, it does help. Again, sense of humor to know these buttons. In the beginning, so where did it all get started? Well, my father is actually, like I told you, he's 85 years old, and in July 1950, he was an Okie who met a Texan, and that's how this story gets started. My dad graduated from high school in Woodward, Oklahoma in 1945. He happened to have been salutatorian of his Woodward High School. Now, I don't really think that's a whole lot of people, but he was still salutatorian, and he had a college scholarship. But he came from very, very meager means. His father had lost his job during the Depression. He worked on the railroad, had lost his job, and even at one point my father's sister had to move away and live in a home where she could be fed. So when he graduated from high school, college wasn't that important to him. So he promised his mom that if she would let him have 1 year to go work, he would come back and go to college. Now, there's a lot of moms in here. How often have we heard those promises? It didn't happen. But maybe something bigger and better happened. His first job he'll always tell you the story that he got fired on one day and got his job, the job of a lifetime, the very same day. And he lost his job working for a trucking company, I believe, walked down the street and was offered the job of a lineman on a construction company, a telephone construction company. And he went home that night, told his mama, I'm going to Texas tomorrow. So she packed his bags and off he came to Texas. And he traveled around Texas working for the same construction company for a number of years. When he ended up, he was about 21 and 22 when he met a very young, pretty girl. And when I tell you she's young, it's illegal how young she was, okay? She was barely 16. She turned 16 in June, and in September, 6 weeks later, they were married. And this is the day of their wedding. Now, he was in his 20s, and I said, well, Dad, didn't you think that was a little weird? And he says, no, it was love at first sight for him. It was actually a blind date. That even makes the story. Now, maybe some of this stuff is made up, but this is a story I've been told. But it was a blind, so I'm just relaying. You know how you can't always trace the stories. He says it was love at first sight. I asked her if it was love at first sight many years later, towards the end of her life. I said, Mama, Daddy says it was love at first sight. Was it for you? And she sat there and she kind of looked down and she looked up at me and she says, well, he had a car that was paid for. So, you know, when you're 16, maybe that's how you define love. So she quit high school, they got married, and off they went to start their life together. So remember, this is important to me to stress. We put so much emphasis on higher education now, and which we all will never argue the importance. But here is a man who graduated high school and a woman who did not graduate from high school. And they've built what we get to talk about today. This is on their wedding day. I wondered when I found this picture and scanned it if had she gotten mad that she married him on that day, and that's why that picture's all wrinkled up. But that's my mom, and again, a very beautiful young woman. Now, whoops, and then about 13 months later comes baby. Pretty typical during that time period. Also, I want to tell you that when I was looking at these pictures, I was like, cooties, my dad has his shirt off. Why would he have his shirt off? This would be my older sister. There's two of us, and she's much older than I am, 4 years. So she, whatever. But so I was just laughing at this picture, wondering kind of what my mother was holding and just how young she is, because she's about 17 in this picture, maybe 18. And I was grossed out that my dad didn't have his shirt on. So I do have to prove that he did go get his shirt on, and they took another picture, but my mom must have gotten bored because she lit up a cigarette while she waited on him to get his shirt on. So I just kind of wanted to show you that they are what they were. Very. Again, they didn't make a lot of money doing construction. I think my dad said he made $50 a week or something in the 50s. And this is, again, I guess my sister, because I'm pretty sure I was cuter than that. But I love my mom's hairdo. She must have had it up in pin, she was getting it ready for Saturday evening. But I just want to show the meager background that they had. And and then there's my older sister, and that's, of course, me, and my mama made those dresses. Now, I think that's the only dress my mama ever made us. But my daddy says she was a wonderful seamstress. Actually, she doesn't do much bad in my dad's eyes, but she wasn't a great photographer, if you notice this. She's obviously got us staring into the light. But the important part of this story, to prove I was the younger one, is that this is the trailer house that we lived in until I was 5 years old. And again, remember, I was the younger one, so for 7 to 9 years, they lived in this trailer house and traveled wherever they wherever he had a job, which was all over, like Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. I was actually born in Kansas. I'm a Jayhawk, haha, not really. But by 6 weeks, I had been in 6 different states. So they traveled from job to job. Now, my daddy got to drive let me back up. My mom could choose whether she drove the digger, and y'all all know what a digger is, I'm assuming. It digs holes, has the big boom on the end. Or she could pull the trailer with the truck. Well, she didn't really like pulling the trailer, so she drove the digger and my daddy pulled the trailer. And I'm not really quite sure where my sister and I were in that picture. But that was our early life. Now, we fast forward now about 6 or 7 years after we moved into a real house, and I can remember the day we moved out of that trailer house. We were supposed to be real excited. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style house. We were moving into town, 2 bathrooms. Because remember, we had 1 bedroom in that trailer. My bed was the kitchen table. My sister got the fold-out couch, and my mom and dad had the bedroom. And so, but by this point, my mom is developing a little bit of style, I'd say. I call this the Diane Van Diane Van Furstenberg picture. But we're classing up a little bit here and having a little bit, things are rocking along pretty well. They started their company in 1957 and named it C&B. My uncle was involved. That stood for Clark and Buck. And my dad will say it also stood for Cheat 'em and Beat 'em. And they were in telephone construction. They did above ground telephone lines, and then it went to underground cable, and then at the end of their career, which we'll talk about later, was fiber optics. So that's how they spent their career. By this time, we didn't travel with him. We got to stay in the 3-bedroom house. And he traveled. He left every Monday morning and came home at Friday night or Saturday, and then turned around and left again on Monday. So my mom was sort of the single mom. And that really worked out well until my dad decided he'd move home my senior year, and he thought he'd be a dad. I was like, really? Seriously? So he definitely traveled a lot, and my mom did a lot and remember again, a 16-year-old girl who had experienced very little in life. There we are, the happy little family. My sister, mom, and dad. This was in late 60s, I guess. Just want to show you we were a happy little family. And then along came grandchildren. These are my 2 children, and they've just fished out of one of the lakes at Clark Gardens. This was quite a while ago. They're now 30 and 20-something years old. Along the way, Max was very well known in his field, and this is important to note when we're talking about what they built, because everything in their life they did with hard work and determination. Really not a lot of thought. They decided to have their own business, so they had their own business. They didn't do a lot of investigating or business plans or master planning. They really did a lot by just shooting from the hip. But here he is, the owner of a very successful construction company, and this is how he usually came in from work. He was the one in the hole getting dirty. I can't really remember why we gave him that, but I just put that in there to be able to talk about his accomplishments. He was well known in the field of construction as the man that could build telephone line in rock. That was really his claim to fame. If you needed telephone line in rock, you called Max Clark. And that he either jackhammered it, dynamited it, cut it, he did whatever. So that was his real claim to fame in the construction world. And they were quite successful. This is at the Clark Gardens now. This is about the time that we moved out to the garden. I show this picture because this is not that long ago picture. This was about the mid-90s, and if you've ever been to the garden, and I hope you have been, and if not, I hope you get in your car today and drive out there. This is where we call the Lake Pavilion, and I wanted to show you this because the land that is now the garden, this is what it looked like. It was a blank piece of land. Follow along with my notes so I don't digress too much. And this was towards the end of their career. I have a couple other pictures in here of them. Whoops. This is them, my mom and dad on their 50th wedding anniversary, and this was a picture of them in front of the chapel with their beloved dog, Chocolate. I do need to put a note in here. My mom passed away this past September. She had experienced Alzheimer's for a number of years, and we lost her in September. 6 weeks before, we lost my dad's beloved dog, Chocolate. So she was 14, and they're both actually buried there in the garden together. So that not really together, next to each other. But this is they were married 61 years before she died. So what made them their money? And that's really kind of what financed the garden and why what they have has been given back to the garden. My father's construction company perfected the rock saw. Now this is really not all that important except to know why we were able to build the garden that they built. Fiber optic cable. When you cut a fiber optic cable, if you're in building your house or a fence and you accidentally break a fiber optic cable, you're wiping out hundreds or thousands of people's access to TV and telephone, and you don't really want to do that, especially if you're a contractor. Well, part of the problem with getting fiber optic cable in was how people were cutting it a lot. You were hearing in the late 80s about whole towns losing their ability to communicate. So my dad knew that he could get fiber optic cable in deeper than anyone else in the country by perfecting this piece of equipment. And it's called the rock saw. He didn't invent the rock saw. He didn't really benefit from his perfection other than he got it in 44 inches. Most people were only getting it in about 20 inches. He built the line from Fort Worth to New Mexico at 44 inches with this machine. The good news, after he did that, telephone companies all around the country rewrote their specs. Everybody had to be able to get their line in this deep or pay a penalty. Well, the really good news is we had the only machine for a year. So like crazy, he built fiber optic cable, and that's how they made the money that finances the gardens today. So the machine is out in the West Garden, if you're ever there. Kind of looks to me like it's in a storage unit, but I didn't get to display it. But it's there, and people ask us all the time, why do you have that machine out here? And it really is because without this machine, they had the land. They didn't have the money to do a garden, a beautiful botanical garden. So this machine at the end of their career is what made them successful. Early 90s, they had a national company come in and offer them a large sum of money. It was especially large, if you remember that mobile home, and to buy their company. The company wasn't for sale. My dad loved doing what he did. My sister was involved. Now, she is the older one, but she's the smarter one because she was in the for-profit business and I'm in the not-for-profit business, so she is the smarter one. But they weren't looking to sell their company, but it was enough money that my mother, being the ever realist, the one who had probably sacrificed the most because she had been left behind all those years, said, no, we're gonna sell. So kind of to this day, I think my dad would still at 85 prefer to be building telephone line rather than building a garden. But they sold the company, and that's the beginning of the garden. And so they had this idea. They had the land. The land was there. It was purchased in the late 60s as a construction warehouse. Always, the company came first. So he built a construction warehouse there. We still office out of that and use it as our greenhouses. And then in 1972, they built the house that they live in live in today. But I wanted to show you this because what you're going to see if you've experienced the garden, it's really, really hard to believe that this piece of land is what we have today. Now, you'll notice the tennis court. The only thing out here was a tennis court. My mother loved to play tennis, and my dad had built her a tennis court. But I want you to notice there's no trees. They didn't cut down a tree. We still don't hardly cut down a tree. This was a fallow piece of land. Recently, an older lady came out and said to Max, my goodness, God gave you a beautiful piece of land to work on. And his response, pardon me, ma'am, but before I got here, God wasn't doing much with it. So these pictures, these next few pictures, I just want to show you what you can do. And again, if I can leave one thing with you today, everything they just did with hard work. A man recently came out and he asked me, he says, what generation are you? And I was like, well, do you mean how old I am? Because that's really none of your business, but I mean, I don't hide it. You know, I could not for the life of me figure this out, what he was asking me, because he kept asking me. And he finally said, how many generations have owned this piece of land? And because it's hard to believe that somebody could do this since 1990. Mid-80s, it got started, really got started in the late 90s. And I finally went, oh, well, my parents bought the land in 1969. So what he was thinking was this had been a long-time family estate, and believe me, it wasn't. So again, that's Chocolate, who we lost this last July. That's Max. He always worked for the first 10 years with a hard hat on because he was used to working with a hard hat on this construction company. So I always think this picture's kind of funny. But I want you to notice the landscape. There's not much there. It hadn't even really been farmed in years. It had been a forgotten piece of land. There is the rocks on the far right corner. The tennis court, so you can see where they had started landscaping. A blank canvas. It was a blank canvas. They had a lot they could do. Oh, whoops, it's coming. Let's see what happens there. The beginning of it. And you know, it really was one of those sayings of pay it forward. They really didn't even then have a plan. There wasn't a plan like, okay, we got 35 acres, let's build a beautiful garden. It really kind of evolved. My mom would say, they traveled a little bit at this point, she'd go, you know, why don't we have a channel garden? And remember, my dad was this man who loved to build anything. So he would build her a channel garden. This is the beginning of the chapel. Did I pass up a really good picture here? Yeah. So where I was just showing you the court, sorry, I couldn't think of the word, is now the channel garden. So that picture of nothing there turned into this. And they built the channel garden. That was the first actual real architectural thing that was built in the garden. And today it's what greets you. But you come in on a sandy, dirty road, and I've seen the look at people's faces like, really? This is a garden? And you've got to just get them in. And because this is the first thing that greets you, is this beautiful English-style garden. Beginning of the chapel. And then today you have a beautiful chapel that sits in the garden. Each morning my dad and mom would kind of sit at the breakfast table, and after they read the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and discuss the stories there, he still does that to this day. You get to discuss what's in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram each morning. And God forbid they ever quit printing the real thing, because he doesn't believe in computers. So he gets it delivered to him at his gate each morning. They would talk about what they wanted to do next. Now remember, for them, what they had was they couldn't imagine that money running out. And I certainly am not wanting to paint some poor picture now, but it was a lot of money. It was in the late 1990s. Money was making us money. And so they would say, let's build a chapel, or let's build a serpentine wall, or a fountain. So that's really how the garden got got started. And I want to stress that because that comes into play as the future of the garden. We have a G-scale train, and this is the beginning of the G-scale train, and you can see that it's quite elaborate. We have 1,200 feet of track, and men and children love it, and you ladies will understand. I think it's because they have about the same working brain. But they'll spend hours looking at the train station. So ladies, when you want to leave your husband, just drop him off at the train station, tell him you'll come back and get him. We don't like it when you do children that way, but some people do it. And again, I want to stress the hard work, the determination, no landscape architecture background, no horticulture background. They love to garden. We're well known for our irises, which we should be, because we have about 3,000 varieties, all of which will be blooming pretty quickly. So get in your car and come out. My dad's sister was an amateur iris hybridizer, and his nephew is a professional. And this will be our third time over the last 15 years that we have hosted the National Iris Show. So April 18th of this year is the National Iris Show, but the garden really kind of got its name from irises. And again, you can see where it's evolved into. There was no water features on this 35 acres. We built all of the tanks and lakes ourselves. Now, I've had an older woman who swears to me her brother died in this lake in the early 50s. And I said, well, no, ma'am, there wasn't a lake there. And she said, yes, there was. And so I just finally let her think her brother died there. It's kind of eerie, but that's, and in our family. And the other thing I want you to remember, this is where my kids learned to fish and swim, and some of the workers were young when they came to work there. They learned to drive their cars on this land. This wasn't a beautiful, you know, like some special place you came. It's where we hung out. The place that's called Lake Pavilion in my family is known as Duck Poop Pond. Okay? And the reason it's known as that is, so just so you know, inside stories here, it was the first water feature built. And so all the ducks around found it because they needed a place to swim. And so they swim and poop, and it would be covered sometimes in duck poop. So of course they learned to swim there because they fished in it, and if they fell in, I wasn't going after them. So they had to get themselves out. So we still in our family say, we'll meet you for a drink at Duck Poop Pond. Now, brides don't like to get married at Duck Poop Pond because they think that's a bad name for it. But I've been married 35 years, and I'm going to say Duck Poop Pond actually does sum up marriages sometimes on some days. So I think it's totally appropriate, but, you know, brides are young. I haven't been married 35 years yet. But we do love, this is still where, if you had me tell you the number one place in the garden that's about our family, it's Duck Poop Pond. We do love it. And I laughed. I was reviewing my slides this morning, and I think this may have been a Freudian slip because it's supposed to say from private garden to public garden. So I must secretly be thinking of a plan to get it to go from public to private. So actually, so the next phase is, how did we get to be a public garden? Because it was a private garden up until 1999 and in 2000. In 1999, my parents formed what's called the Max and Billie Clark Foundation, and in that they gave to the foundation about 150 acres, 35 acres of which is the public part of the garden, and it is a 501c3 as an educational foundation. So that's how it actually became a public garden. And in April 22nd, 2000, they opened it as a public garden. Great shot of summer, spring. But this is me. I came in about 5 years ago, and this isn't a fun trip. This is an uphill battle, because at this point we're starting, my mom is at Alzheimer's, she's no longer part of the garden when I came in 5 years ago. And the question the family had was, How are we going to keep this garden going? Again, my dad's 85. He's out there working today. It's not like he's going anywhere, but and he's always been the force behind the garden as far as building it, and he's expanding it 20 acres, and I pretended until this last month that I did not know he was doing that, because I don't know how we're going to take care of that extra 20 acres. But it's where the National Irish Show is, so I had to embrace it last month. I ignored him for 2 years. That, really, are you working up north? I don't know what that means. The family's like, what are we going to do to keep this going? Because it is something that, once it was given into the foundation, it's a gift. It's a gift to the community. They really were paying it forward. They just didn't know it. They didn't have a plan. So it's now ours, and it's what do we do with it to preserve it for generations to come. So I feel a lot of times like I'm going up this hill and never reaching the top. You got to also remember that my dad thinks that computers are a waste of time. He's actually told me, you waste your day all day long on that computer. And I said, do you know what I do on that computer? You know, the hundreds of emails, the Facebook, all the things. So you've got 2 generations here. And trust me, this is the 50s, I'm the new 30s, okay? So if you're thinking, well, she's got to be phasing herself out, well, not yet. So you've got an 80-something-year-old who believes that you show up to work every morning at 7:30, you take lunch every day at 12, not 5 minutes after 12, not 10 minutes before. And his staff does this, his gardening staff. I can be having a delivery of 1,400 rose bushes at 12:15. Well, guess what? They're going to get delivered without my crew there, because everybody goes to lunch at 12, but they're back at 1 o'clock, and they close down at 5. So you've really got this old school way of doing business that's very, very successful. Again, please understand, I know that we've got what we have because of their work and their determination. The idea of me working remotely, that just is totally not heard of. And to give you a little bit of background on myself, I actually have a husband and a house and a family and dogs that live in Bryan, Texas. And so when I came to the garden, I thought, oh, I'll work a week or so, month, and then I'll go home a week or so. My kids are kind of gone, and I had an empty nest. Working for a man that doesn't believe in computers, working remotely does not work. So I haven't been home 2 weeks probably in 5 years. I have a wonderful husband who probably believes our marriage sometimes belongs on Duck Poop Pond, who comes to this area. He drives 3.5 hours every weekend to support this family business. And he does it, again, we all love the garden. My children who grew up in Bryan will say this is home. This is where we have the most connection to the land. They got in trouble for wrecking golf carts. They probably smoked and drank when they weren't supposed to. This is where they celebrated life. So I came thinking I could save it. That's easy. I can do that. People just need to know about it. And I was naive. So I inherited the naiveness from them. I didn't necessarily inherit quite the hard work that they do. The other thing I want to stress before I forget, Max was the driving force behind it, but my mom, and I have to say this without getting sentimental, she was the beauty and the grace of the garden. She didn't really, people say, I bet your mom loved to garden. Well, I'm really not sure she did. But she loved making things beautiful. She had a certain style about her that she just must have had, because she sure didn't learn it from her mother or her family or really her life experiences. She was beautiful. I'd bring people home from school, or even today, well, now that my mom's gone, it's not, and I'd introduce them to my mom, and they'd go, wow, your mom's beautiful. And she was beautiful. And they'd go, you look a lot like your dad. Oh, okay, I think. So what was missing when my mom got sick was really that beauty and the grace of the garden. Things started growing in areas that weren't designed to grow there, and the workers, the workers who've given their life to the garden, some of them have lived there over 20 years. a weed blooming is a flower. So to get them to weed some of the blooming weeds is really hard. So, you know, it kind of didn't fall, I don't want to say in disrepair, but it just didn't have her feel. So I'm thinking, I can do that. I can come in there and do that, and I can get people to come. Because one of the things we hear all the time is you're the best kept secret. Do you know what I want to do when I hear that? I mean, I want to run like crazy and fall off that cliff. Or they'll say, you just need to advertise. Trust me, our budget, a good 10% of our budget is spent on advertising. So, you know, it takes time. So this is me climbing up, but not quite sure knowing what's on the other side. And so we decided about 2 years ago that to preserve the landscape and the legacy of the gardens, we needed a master plan. Have any of you experienced a master plan before? Okay, you know how your mama always said, don't wear dirty underwear because if you get in a car wreck, they might see it? Well, this is sort of like this, although I'm not saying I have dirty underwear, but it is, all your warts come out. If you really do the master plan right, it's painful, it hurts. In walks the dreaded master planner, and this is one of our peacocks, but Rick was not this cute. We had the great fortune of having two very experienced botanical park. Again, remember, I don't have any botanical park experience. I had had an event center, but not a botanical park. So in walks, the first day, Rick Daly comes, the master planner. I had never met Rick. He comes in and he pulls in. We have a half-mile driveway off Maddox Road, and it's a dirt road, and you know, again, you're in the mesquite pasture. So he pulls in and stops his car. It clearly says, proceed. I mean, there's nowhere else to go. You got to go this half mile. Well, he stops his car and calls the office and says, I don't know where I'm going, and there's no signs out here. Well, did you turn off Maddox Road? Yes, but I'm here at the gate, and I don't know where I'm going. Well, that's how I first met Rick, and I'm like, yippee-ki-yay, this is going to be fun. So we're talking about the gift shop, the first hour, and I've had to show him all the numbers, all the budgetary numbers, and that's painful. So I'm worried, what if I have done something wrong? You know, what if I haven't been fiduciarily responsible to be able to preserve this legacy? So he sits there and he says to me, well, how do you know when to order in the gift shop? Well, I look at him and I know this answer. I said, well, when we run out, I order. And he goes, really? And he's this very, you wouldn't like Rick in a bar, okay? He just wasn't a whole lot of fun. And he looks at me and he says, and so I grin, I'm a sweet Texas girl. I can get anybody to like me. I said, well, we have a really old cash register. And he says, that's good, because you're really doing business the old way. Okay, so this is going to be fun. So we get going with Rick, and here's the board. This is our board and advisors. And you can see most of us are engaged. We're ready, we're listening. But do you see the third one in, he's looking back? That's Max. He isn't listening. Because he never did like Rick Daly, and I love Rick Daly. And not even though I wouldn't have met him up in a bar, but we all laugh and say we wear a little, please don't think I'm being sacrilegious, the what would Jesus do? We all call it what would Rick Daly do? That's our litmus test. Would we do that? What would Rick Daly do? But Max, remember, there was never a master plan. So this was pretty much a waste of time for him. So he thought. He does eventually get engaged, but he prides himself on telling people there was no master plan. So to now at 80-something be telling him there's going to be a master plan and to preserve, again, he needed to buy in because we need this to keep going. Oops, I did it again. So we did eventually work up a mission, and we're not going to go through all our mission, goals, vision stuff because that's kind of boring, but some of it I wanted to share with you so that you can see how we're going to preserve it. So we sat down with him and said, what was your initial goal? Why did you do this? He said, well, I wanted a garden that didn't require a lot of water, a lot of maintenance, and that looked nice. Hence, that's why we have so many bulbs in the garden, the daylilies, the irises, the cannas. He also knew that by working long distance across farmland and deserted homelands, that what was coming up was your grandma's bulbs, and that they were coming up without anybody taking care of them along old fence lines, so that's what he really wanted. And in the early 70s, we weren't talking about native plants. Even in the 80s, I'm really not sure that most of us were talking native plants. And it took me about 2 years to educate him to quit saying the statement, well, you can't have a native plant garden because you have only 4 plants in Texas. And I go, Daddy, don't say that, don't say that. You know, when the native plant people started coming out, you go, don't say that. And he go, well, a crepe myrtle's not native. Well, you're right, Daddy, that's true. So his thing was Texas adaptable plants, and that's what we have based the garden planting on. And tourists and residents alike. We live in the edge of Parker and Palapena County, and Palapena County is one of the poorest counties in the state. So we can't rely on locals to keep us going. So we have to rely on tourists, and we even include you Fort Worth people as tourists. So if you think 45 miles is too far, you're a tourist, so come on out. It's a great day trip. So these things, the mission is what is now our compass, where we go, how we make decisions. Our vision, and again, we're not going to read through all this, vibrant destination, we welcome gardeners, beautiful architecture, because we have some awesome architectural features in the garden that makes us a little bit different than other gardens. And a footnote here, we in North Texas are one of the luckiest places I know. Maybe around Philadelphia they have the same thing. But within 90 miles you have 4 world-class gardens, and they're all different. And we're not competing with, or nor are we need to work better together. But you've got the Dallas Arboretum, the Fort Worth Botanical Garden, Shandor Garden in Weatherford, and Clark Garden as your far west. Those are within really hardly 90 miles. So we're not trying to be the Dallas Arboretum. Now, I do want their pumpkins in the fall. I do have pumpkin envy. But other than that, I don't want to be the Dallas Arboretum. So each of these gardens has what they, and I can't have the Japanese gardens at Fort Worth either. So if you love gardens, you don't have to pick one. You can love them all, and all of them teach us and have something. So we play up on our positives, our strengths, and I can't have their pumpkins until Tom Thumb comes to Mineral Wells. So we embrace the iris, the cannas, and I have to tell you, I hate irises. And we have 3,000 of them, and I hate them because everywhere I went the first few years, I'd say, I work at Clark Gardens. And they go, oh, the iris place. And I'd go, well, for 1 month, we have all the other stuff for other 11 months. So I went back to work, and I was mad one day, and I threw my stuff down. I said, why does everybody think we're the iris place? Well, I looked around, and on the worker's shirt, they had an iris. And the cap had an iris, and the gates had an iris. So I got rid of every iris on any piece of paper we had. I hated them. Well, guess what? They're on everything we have right now because we're the National Iris Show, so I love them again until next year. So we embrace what we had, and we celebrate the history of Clark Gardens. Because what I really want to share with everybody is that it just was hard work. You know, when you plant, I didn't tell you that Max doesn't believe in planting big trees. We start out, like this week I had to ask him if I could get a 3-gallon in because I couldn't find a smaller one. He plants them from little bitty pots, and they do well, He says in 5 years they'll do better than the plant your big bald and burlap tree. He says it'll be healthier and just about the same size. So here's a perfect example of what the garden looks like in the summer. It is what we are. That's actually oxbow. Irises. I should have worn my iris t-shirt. I got a really pretty iris t-shirt this year. And poppies. Now, this could be our hidden cash crop. I've been trying to think if I could get, how much trouble could I get into. We have about 100,000 pink double ruffle poppies on a good year, maybe more, that all started with a handful of seeds that my mom threw out, and they have self-seeded all over the garden. And I really don't think you can get the heroin out of them, but I thought about trying, even on a bad day, even if it was just for me. But anyway. And then the guiding principles of this master plan. And the biggest thing I want to show down here is we operate within our financial means. Yikes, that hurts. Because you got to remember, there was no budget. And my dad, he doesn't really love spending money, but he loves to build. And building takes money. So all of these wonderful guiding principles, and what would Rick Daley do? Darn him. Are you talking to me? This is probably Max thinking, you're not telling me how I'm going to spend my money. And so was actually in our photo contest. I love this. So are you talking to me? And then this is how I felt. Could I possibly roll over and just play dead? Just kind of pretend? Or just give in? Just give in. So the budget. And then Rick keeps on preaching. He just keeps yakking. Gets awfully cold for the board. Then we have to listen again. But so what does all this mean? Being a nonprofit is a tax designation. It's not a business plan. You can't operate not working towards making money. Right now, the garden earns about 1/3 of our income. And 2/3 of the income, or what it takes to run the garden, comes from Max and Billie. As they pass on, the foundation will be able to only pay about a half of that. So we've got to learn how to earn 2/3 of our income and rely on the foundation for about 1/3. How do you do that? Now, don't be like my husband. I was going through this with him one day, and I said, so I have to double the income in the next 5 years. He went, oh, honey, that ought to be easy. Oh, he won't say that again for a long time. He thought I was out in the poppies, perhaps. I was like, what do you mean? That's not a lot. I mean, it's a daunting task to me, but it is a map. It's a good one now. Now we have a plan. So we had to look at where our revenue sources are. Weddings. We do a whole lot of weddings, but you know what? They do make our money, but they're not one place in our mission or vision. Not one place are we a special events facility. So we spend a lot of energy on those because they make our money, but that's not our mission. It's a means to an end. So that's something we have to continue to remember. We love our weddings, sort of, but they are the main source of our income. We had to give people a compelling reason to come. Because when it's in your backyard, you think, oh, well, it's a little windy today. I'm not going to go out to Clark Gardens. But if you give them a reason to come. So we do Spring Festival, Mother's Day, Fall Festival. And we try to do it for everybody. At Spring Festival, it's Texas wine and cheese. It's our little fancy. And at Fall Festival, it's a chili cook-off. So why do we do that? To get our beer drinking chili guys to come out, along with our wine people to come out, to show them what the garden is. Again, it's about what we have in North Texas. We have a run. Anybody want to do the half marathon? Some of you may recognize Howard Garrett. We play pumpkin golf. I have a few pumpkins. It's not, maybe they'll donate me some of their pumpkins. We have a car show, again, and then some of my very favorites. We have what's called botanical at the garden, and that's a free night. You bring a can of food, and it goes to the local food banks. You can also, we have a dog. You can, if you have a fancy enough dog, you could win Mr. and Miss Parker Paws or Mr. and Miss Palapino County. But there are some, if you have a dog, you do have to have a platform, and you do have some serious obligations if you run for that. But we do a lot of fun. And you know why we do the free events? Cost us money, but there are people who can't come to the garden. We do charge an admission. And living in one of the poorest counties, how else are we going to show to those children and to their parents what we have in their backyard? So we love botanical. And I'll even bring a dang reindeer out there if you'll come and pay your $5 and you get to look at him. You can't pet him, he'll poke your eye out. But we get our reindeer out there every year and thousands of kids come and look at him. Not a money maker for us, not a source of revenue, is our educational programs. We do any school, public school that calls us can come to the garden for free. And we may have to change that because we can't do everything for free. People want us to, but we can't. They want a program. Teachers don't want to come out there and design a program. They want to come out there and do a program. We don't have that person on staff. We have members. And we love our members. And if you're a member of the Dallas Arboretum or the Fort Worth Botanical Garden, you can actually use your membership to come to Clark Gardens. But members, why are members important? Members are important because members become donors. And to earn that, to raise that income, we're not going to do it off ticket sales. No gardens are doing that. You have to have a source of donors. And we schmooze. This is my dad, and this is before my mama died. I'm not sure what he's doing. And you'll notice the iris. You'll notice the iris, and he still wore his name tag, Max E. Clark. But we're schmoozing with some of the members. This is this year what we're doing. Planet Pink. We donate a percentage of any flower that's purchased through Clark Garden that is pink to local breast cancer awareness and mammographies. Why do we do those things? Because we're part of the community. Yeah, we've got to figure out how to make money, but we're also there to give back too. My mom was a breast cancer survivor. This year, the iris that's on all of our t-shirts is an iris that was named after her. So it's a part of being part of the community. How do you get in touch with us, or how do you know what's going on? We Facebook, we Pinterest, we Twitter, we blog, we YouTube. We don't YouTube as good as we should, but we do all that. And in our office, we have 3 people. We have the administrative assistant, myself, that's the executive director, and a director of events and sales. So if anyone puts on my tombstone that I loved Facebook, I'll come back and haunt you. I Facebook like crazy, but it is not, it's all about getting the word out, and it does. We had somebody come from Oklahoma last week to our Easter egg hunt. They said they saw it on Facebook. It works. Social media works. It just requires a lot of time. You can read about us. Southern Living did an article on us. It was a wonderful article a couple of years ago. It's really how I think we started getting heard about in the Metroplex. Neil Sperry just did a wonderful article in March called Magic Max. Steve Chambly from Shandor wrote it. It was really a sweet article. But all this makes you exhausted. And this is me. At the end of the season, I'm just really tired because it's a lot of work to get the word out, to not be the best kept secret. But we can either spread our wings and take flight. These, again, are animals here in our garden. Or you can be the road runner and run away with the prize. But when I was looking at it, I thought, well, maybe I'm running from it. Again, this is a road runner who comes across our driveway each and every day to get food for her babies. But we're going to get over the hump. And we are going to get over the hump. We are going to preserve this legacy. It's a story that needs to be told. And it's a gift that he gave to the community, again, never intending to. And I think talking to Leanne about what these talks are usually about, it's about how people left something they didn't even know they were going to leave. So that's, I think we'll get over the hump. In tranquility. And as we look to the future, who's the next generation? And to be honest, I don't know. My kids are all somewhere else doing other things, but again, this is what they call home. They've shared me with the gardens. My children are all over the place. I have one that lives in England as an equestrian rider, and one that lives in San Angelo with chickadees, and Then my daughter's an actor in New York. So, you know, right now I can't see where they're going to come back. My sister's children too are very varied. I don't see what the next generation is. It may not be a family member, but we will be there. We will persevere. But always with this man in mind. And I wish it was my mom beside him. I don't have some good pictures of her working, but he's still at 85 leaving a legacy for the future generations. And he is our north-south. Sometimes I wish he'd go south. And leaving the gardens. Any questions?
Test plot for roses? Do you still
Yes.
do that?
Mm-hmm. We just opened up a new one out the front in the mesquite pasture. And we are been told by A&M, the earth kind roses, that we're the first dwarf test site in the country. So we'll see how those do. But yes.
Do you put that kind of information on your blog site or your website, what roses do well or what ours?
You know, that's a kind of a tricky thing because A&M controls that earth kind. That's a trademark for A&M. And earth kind, it means any practice. It's associated with roses. Everybody knows what earth kind roses. But the whole earth kind program is at A&M that's not based on necessarily organic, but being sustainable and using chemicals only as a last resort. So in the earth kind test site, you cannot, technically you're not even supposed to water them. You know, we kind of cheat and water because we have to weed our beds. We're a public garden. But for the 3 years, they're not deadheaded, they're not, there's nothing that can be done to them. No chemicals, no anything, no even natural fertilizer. You plant them and you watch them, and then every year they're judged by judges from the Earth Kind program. The end of that 3 years, then they release those results. People introduce their own roses to be Earth Kind because we have one of the largest buck roses. For those of you who know roses, that's an Iowan from Iowa. He developed, and it was actually one of the first Earth Kind roses, Carefree Beauty. But so no, we don't really put that out there. And then they'll do beautiful in our garden, but they're not Earth Kind if they don't do beautifully in everywhere all over Texas. Any other questions?
Two things. Are the poppies blooming yet?
No, dang it, we're 2 weeks behind. Our yellow banks roses, the azaleas and then the yellow banks roses are always our clue that spring is really here. Yellow banks usually do go in the March, and they're just now starting. They're not prime yet. I think we kind of missed azalea season. I think it's not going to be our better. So within about 2 weeks, the poppies should be blooming.
And the other question is, how many people do you have doing maintenance?
10. There are 10 gardeners that do the maintenance, and full time, year round, 12 months out of the year. And then that doesn't count Max, who does every bulb himself. He digs every iris, every daylily, every canna, and plants every one of them. Every now and then he'll let somebody dig a canna, but he does them all. Now you should be asking me, how are we going to water this property? Because I didn't talk about that, and that's the hot button. Who knew that 10 years ago we'd be talking about water, at least water that we can. All of the water used to maintain that garden is collected by rain, or we do have some wells. We have access to city water, but there is no way we can afford it. We have no sprinkler system in the entire park. Everything is hand watered. Now this is again one of those things I don't necessarily agree with Mr. Clark about, but he believes watering systems waste water, which they do the way most of us use them. But the guys in the summer, those 10 guys are running water hose all day long, but from our lakes and our tanks, and it's water we have. 2 years ago, we were out. We were out. We were sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to have to go on city water. What 2 areas can we maintain? Not 35 acres, and it rained. So, But we're going into this summer. I understand it's going to be, what they're predicting is a worse drought than last summer, and our main lake is about 2/3 empty. We need the rain, but we'll deal with it. You know, those are things that we can't control. But all of us as gardeners have to be sustainable. And what are we planting? What are we doing? Because water is going to be a huge issue. And then, you know, they took our water rights away from us on our big lake. We dug it. It's rainwater because Dow Chemical, and I'll get off my soapbox, but Dow Chemical on the coast, thanks to Governor Rick Perry, and y'all may love Rick Perry, but he made a deal. Dow Chemical owns all the water rights, senior water rights of the Brazos. We're 20 miles from the Brazos. Our lake is never going to run into the Brazos, okay? But because Dow pulled their senior water rights, we lost our water rights to our lake. So watch that issue, read that issue, because those of us that, it's going to affect your ranchers, your everything. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox about water. But water's very important, and surface water rights are a thing that is very, very troubling to the garden. Maybe our biggest challenge if we lose our lake water. Any other questions? I know I went on. I'm sorry, I always do it. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say your presentation was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you. I enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. I want to remind everybody that the Summerlee Foundation generously helps us subsidize this series and preserve our past series, which I think that Carol illustrated for us really well, how we all have historical collections, precious things that are left to us by others that we would like to try to take care of. And this is one example of how one family has preserved their legacy for generations to come and is working hard to do that. So I encourage you to do all that too. Be with us next month, and thank you for spending your morning with us.